Okay, so the note sheet that you have in front of you should have these two triangles at the very top, yes? 45, 45, 90, and 30, 60, 90. Now, for the most part, when I looked through most of the tests, there were a few of you who did really well on both of them, a few of you who did well on one of these two, or a few of you who did well on the other. And then some who didn't do well on either. Now, one of the big things with these is really figuring out, one, which triangle are we looking at? Are we looking at a 45, 45, 90 or a 30, 60, 90? Because the 45, 45, 90, well, the sides opposite the 90 degrees, or not the 90 degrees, opposite the 45 degrees are going to be the same. Whatever value they have, they're going to be the exact same. And the hypotenuse, as well, is going to be whatever that value is that's the same times the square root of 2. So the sides opposite the 45 degrees are the same. The side opposite the 90 degrees is whatever that measure is times the square root of 2. And well, if we're given the hypotenuse, well, we can divide it by the square root of 2 to get the other two sides. Now, the 30, 60, 90 was a little bit more challenging because there's a little bit more parts to it. And really, it all revolved around the side opposite the 30 degrees, because we will call the side opposite 30 degrees x. The side opposite 90 degrees is 2 times x, so whatever side's opposite 30, we multiply it by 2 to get the side opposite 90. And then the side opposite 60 degrees is going to be the shortest side length times the square root of 3. And this kind of gives us our three sides for the 30, 60, 90. Now, if we're given the shortest side, we'll multiply it by 2 to get the hypotenuse, and multiply it by the square root of 3 to get the side opposite 60. Well, if I'm given the hypotenuse on a 30, 60, 90, I can divide it by 2 to get the side opposite 30, and then multiply that by the square root of 3 to get the other side. If I'm given the side opposite 60, well, we divide it by the square root of 3 to get the side opposite 30, and then multiply it by 2 to get the hypotenuse. So if I look at this one here, what are we going to be doing? What do I need to do to find the two values? Y is going to be 8. Why? The sides opposite the 45 degrees are going to be equal. The sides opposite 45 degrees are always going to be equal. Since one of them is 8, the other has to be 8. Now, what about the hypotenuse? Eight times the square root of 2. And we could have done the quadratic formula also. Not the quadratic formula, the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. And would have gotten the same thing, because 8 squared plus 8 squared would equal 128, which the square root of 128 is 8 square root of 2. And we get this here. Questions on this here? Okay, let's look at this one here. I need to find the value of x, and I need to find the value of y. So why would x be 14? Even though this other angle is not written in, it's understood to be 45. Because that's the only way that I can have a 90-degree angle and a 45-degree angle, is the other has to be 45. Now what about y? Mm-hmm. 14 square root of 2. So really, if I'm given a 45, 45, 90, and one of the sides opposite the 45 degrees, well, those two sides are the same, and the hypotenuse is whatever that measure is times the square root of 2. Let's see what this one here. Okay. Yes. Sides opposite the 45 degrees are the same. The hypotenuse is whatever that measure is times square root of 2. Okay. This time, do they give us one of the side lengths that's opposite 45? No, what did they give us? The hypotenuse, 4 square root of 2. Right, I can take the hypotenuse and divide it by the square root of 2. Because we know the side lengths, x or y, are going to be the same, yes? Because they're opposite the 45 degrees. And whatever that measure is, if I multiply it by the square root of 2, I would get the hypotenuse, yes? So if I wanted to know the value of x, I'll erase this here. Well, I know that if I take x and multiply it by the square root of 2, I will get what? The hypotenuse, yes? And what is the hypotenuse? 4 square root of 2. How do I get x by itself? Well, I can divide both sides by the square root of 2, which could cause those to cancel. And now we just need to do 4 square root of 2 divided by the square root of 2. So what is that? 4, yes? So the value of x is 4. What's the value of y? Wait a minute. If it's 4 square root of 2, well, we know it should have the square root of 2, so x and y are 4. So if it already has the square root of 2, it's a little bit easier to work with. But again, anytime we're given the hypotenuse on a 45, 45, 90, we just divide it by the square root of 2 and simplify. Questions on this here? Okay. What do we do for this one here? Which would give us what? So if it already has the square root of 2, it's a little bit easier to work because, well, it's just whatever that number is, yes? Because if we divide it by the square root of 2, well, the square root of 2 and square root of 2 simplify out. Okay? How about this one here? What do we... Huh? Well, we can't divide 7 by 2 because that's why we have 7 halves. But what do we need to do to find the value of x or y? Even though it's a fraction? Because again, we know what? These side lengths here, if I multiply it by the square root of 2, I get the what? Hypotenuse, yes? So if I want to get one of the side lengths, I take the hypotenuse and divide it by the square root of 2. So it really doesn't matter what the number is. If I want to find one of the side lengths, I just take the hypotenuse and divide it by the square root of 2. So both of the side lengths are going to be 7 over 2, 7 halves. Questions on this here? Hopefully this is starting to make a little more sense on how these work. Yes? Okay, let's look at this one here. The hypotenuse is 18. So we can't really use that little trick we saw a minute ago, right? Because if it has the square root of 2, it's just the number in front of it. Because the last one, I mean, we had, I think it was 7 square root of 2, so it's just 7, or 15 square root of 2 was the hypotenuse, so it's 15. It doesn't work as well, right? Because this doesn't have a square root of 2. So what do we... Yes. We still divide by the square root of 2. This would be 9 what? 9 square root of 2. It ends up being 9 square root of 2. Because if we took this and multiplied 9 square root of 2 by the square root of 2, Well, square root of 2 times the square root of 2 is what? 2. 9 times 2 is 18. Questions on this here so far? We're good with this here? Okay, so what do we do here? And we need to do 8 divided by the square root of 2 because that would give us the 2 other sides. And you could write it like this here because they are the same value, x equals y equals 4 square root of 2. But hopefully you're noticing if we have one of the two congruent sides, the other one's going to be the same. The hypotenuse is whatever that value is times square root of 2. If we're given the hypotenuse, we divide it by the square root of 2 to get the side lengths. Questions on this here? All right. So looking at this here, what can we do? Divide by the square root of 2. Because again, we're given the hypotenuse and the side lengths are going to be whatever the hypotenuse is equal to it times square root of 2. Now 7 divided by the square root of 2 is what? 7 square root of 2 over 2. So why does this have a 7 halves instead of just a whole number? Huh? Right, we can't divide 7 by 2. We're not able to divide 7 by 2, so it stays as a fraction. Because on the last two, we're even, and they are divisible by 2, so they reduced. This one here did not, because it is not even. Questions on this here? All right. So this here, so we're given one of the sides, so the other side's also going to be 8. Why not? Right, it's 30, 60, 90. So we need to be paying attention to the triangles. Now you also need to be paying attention to how these are set up. Because we need to remember and try to make sure we know which angle is 30, which one is 60, and which one is 90. Now with the 30, 60, 90 right triangle, what was the one side, or the angle, the side opposite, which angle did we really focus on? The smaller one, so the side opposite 30 degrees, yes? Because the side opposite 30 degrees kind of give us a reference point to everything else. Because if I know the side opposite 30 degrees, well, I can multiply it by 2 to get to the hypotenuse, and I can multiply it by the square root of 3 to get the side opposite 60. So are we given the side opposite 30 here? Well, yes, it's told to us as 8, yes? Well, the hypotenuse, the side opposite 90 degrees, is twice this length. So 8 times 2 is? So the hypotenuse is 16. So once we find the shortest side length, well, I can multiply it by 2 to get to the hypotenuse. Now to get the side opposite 60, I'm going to take that length and multiply it by the square root of 3. Well, that would just be 8 square root of 3. And that's it. That's all we've got to do for this year. Questions on this here so far? Are you ready for the next one? Yes? Okay, so what side are we given? The small one, the side opposite 30, yes? So that's nice because everything revolves around it. So if I want to get the biggest side, what do I do with the smallest side? We times it by 2, because if I want to get the hypotenuse, I take the smallest side length and multiply it by 2. Well, 2 times 1/2 is, well, 1. So for us, x is equal to 1. Now, what do I do to find the side opposite 60? I take the shortest side and multiply it by the square root of 3. So we'd have 1/2 times the square root of 3. And that's it. Because once we have the smallest side, we multiply it by 2 to get the hypotenuse, and multiply it by the square root of 3 to get the side opposite 60. Okay. What do we do? To get the hypotenuse. So we multiply 14 by 2 to get to the hypotenuse, which 2 times 14 is 28. Now what? To get the side opposite 60, we're going to multiply 14 by the square root of 3. And well, that will give us what? 14 square root of 3. Okay, here we have 12 square root of 5. So will that change things? Well, no. We'll do the same things. So what do we do first? Square root of 3 or 2? 2? Square root of 3 or 2, it doesn't matter which. Because it depends on which one we're doing. If I want the hypotenuse, I'm going to multiply it by 2, which will give us 24 square root of 5. Now to get the other side, we'd do what? And multiply this by the square root of 3. And 12 square root of 5 times the square root of 3 is going to be 12 square root of. And this here is our answer. Questions on this here? Okay. So we're given 3 square root of 3, so I would multiply it by 2 to get the hypotenuse. Why not? Right, we're going to have to go to the shortest side here first, because we're given the side opposite 60. Now, normally, to get to this side, this 3 square root of 3, we would have multiplied the shortest side by what? The square root of 3, yes? As to get to the side opposite 60, well, I take the shortest side and multiply it by the square root of 3. But we don't have the shortest side, do we? So we're going backwards to the shortest side. So to undo that, I take 3 square root of 3 and do what? By? I'm going to divide it by the square root of 3, because I multiplied the shortest side by the square root of 3 to get to the side opposite 60 degrees. So to go backwards, I'm going to divide by the square root of 3. Well, everything divided by itself is 1. So the shortest side here is 3. Now what do we need to do to get to the hypotenuse? Now I can take the shortest side and multiply it by 2 to get 6. So really, even when we get to the ones with the hypotenuse and the side opposite 60 degrees, I'm going to take those and get back to the shortest side so that we can find the other one. Because everything's easier to work with once we have the shortest side, yes? Well, yeah. Times it by 2 to get the hypotenuse, and I can times it by the square root of 3 to get to the side opposite 60. Okay? So here, we're given the side opposite what? Opposite 60 degrees. So what do we need to do? And we're dividing by the square root of 3 to get to the shortest side, the side opposite 30. Because if I can get to the side opposite 30, it's easy to find the hypotenuse from here. Now what do I need to do to get to the hypotenuse? We need to multiply 12 by 2, which would give us 24. Questions on this here? Okay. All right, what do we need to do? It'd be something with the 15 square root of 3, right? We would. All right, we would divide it by the square root of 3, because if I divide it by the square root of 3, I will get back to the shortest side length. Right, and y would equal 30, because we'll take 15 and multiply it by 2, which will tell us that it is 30. 30. This isn't too bad on these here, right? Because I have the square root of 3, they just kind of cancel out. I move it over, and we're good. So like on this one here, I can kind of divide by the square root of 3 so it goes away, and then, wait a minute. This one doesn't have a square root of 3 with it, does it? What are we going to do? All right, we're still going to divide it by the square root of 3 to get to the shortest side length. It doesn't divide as nicely, but we still do the same process. Now, luckily, y'all don't have to know exactly how we divide by the square root of 3 or the square root of 2, because the calculator will do it for you. And it'll give you 4 square root of 3. Bless you. Now, what do we need to do next? All right, we're going to do 2 times 4 square root of 3, which would give us 8 square root of 3. And that's it. So even though the number doesn't have a square root of 3, we still do the exact same process. All right, how about here? We'll take 8 and divide it by the square root of 3, yes. Now, why did this one reduce, but the other one did? All right, it's an even number. It doesn't divide by 3. Some even numbers do, but this one's not divisible by 3. Now, what do we do to find the last part? Times it by 2. Right. If we times it by 2, we'll get 16. 16 square root of 3 over 3. And that's it. Questions on this here? You ready for the next one? What do we do? Do we agree with this here? Yes, we all agree. 3 square root of 3 and 6 square root of 3. Okay, so again, we take 6 and divide it by the square root of 3, right? Why am I dividing by 2 this time? They give us the hypotenuse. Yep, the side opposite 90 degrees. And normally, because if I went from the smallest side to the hypotenuse, I would be taking the shortest side length and multiplying it by 2. So if we're going the other direction, I'm not going to multiply, I'm going to divide. Well, 6 divided by 2 is 3. So the value of x is 3. X equals 3. Well, what do I need to do to find the other side length? Find this side length, I'm going to take 3 and multiply it by the square root of 3. That is, well, 3 square root of 3. All right. What do we do here? We're divided by 2, so we get 16 divided by 2, which is 8. Eight square root of 3. Yeah, the only time we'll have to really do something more than just throw a square root of 3 on is if there's already a square root of 3 or something else there. Questions on this here? Okay. What do we do here? We divide by 2. Which will give us 11 halves. Mainly because we don't want to put decimals and radicals next to each other. They don't get along. Like for the Hatfield clan and McCoys. The Hatfields and McCoys. Okay. Now to get the other side length, we're going to do what? Take 11 halves and multiply it by the square root of 3. And what would that give us? 11 square root of 3 over 2. We put the square root on top. It's not necessarily wrong to put it out to the side, but we want to put it on top because that's where it goes. Yes. Any other questions on this here? And I think that's it, isn't it? Yeah. And I mean, we could have other fractions. I mean, we could have had 11 square root of 5 on top or as a hypotenuse, and that wouldn't change anything. No matter what numbers we have there, we're still doing these same steps, these same operations. Now, hopefully these make a little more sense. Y'all are good with these here? Yes? There is not an additional homework assignment.